All right, so let me ask you something real quick. Are there any amp companies over the years, whether big or small, that you really feel like you've overlooked? Like you haven't given them their due? For me, my amp history over the past 10 years have been very homogenous, you can say. It pretty much goes first amp I ever bought, like the first real amp I ever bought was this like Vox Valvetronics. I think it was called the VT20, and I thought that thing was literally incredible because it had this tube overdrive. And then once I got into the real tube amp world, I went into the Fenders, and then it would go Fender, Vox, Fender, Vox, Fender, Vox. Because a lot of the players that I looked up to were really clean guys, real bluesy guys. You know, guys who would use a tube screamer if they wanted to turn up the drive. But I don't think for myself as a player, I was really used to the world of having a higher gain amp, if you can even call it that. Vox AC30 with a top boost is basically what I would call at the time a higher gain amp. And that's where more recently as a guitar player, I feel like I've been able to notice one of my weaknesses. There's not a lot of variety in the tones I can get. I feel like I'm getting better, I'm learning about the clean thing, but when it comes to not even the harder rock or metal, because I haven't even touched that yet, but real legitimate like crunch amps, I haven't been able to really dive deep into that world until right now. You see, there's this brand of amps called Orange amps, and they're very big. If you're a guitar player, you know about Orange amp. They're well known around a lot of like rock and roll players. I mean, they're an amp company that's been around for over 50 years. Jimmy Page has played one, and I've had very, very little experience with them. That is until today. You see, I want to try something new. I genuinely want to see what people are talking about. I want to see what the hype is all about. You see, you gotta believe me when I say I have genuinely little to no experience with these types of amps before, right? And to be quite vulnerable for a second, the only time that I had ever used anything close to like the sound of an Orange amp, it sounded something like this. That's not an Orange amp. That's actually an emulation of an Orange amp. The real thing is actually this bad boy right here. You see, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Orange OR30. And I'm actually going to put it down for a second because it's getting pretty heavy and it's weighing on me. Now, believe me when I say I have actually been Team Amp Sim for a couple of months now. I think it's been since the day that I got Tone King Imperial and really started to know about Amplitude and how to use it like correctly. I've been just go to practice sessions, even sometimes for recording for other people. Just give me the amp sim and let me get the easy option. However, when I think about what I use for my crunch tones within those amp sims, it's usually an Orange or a Marshall. But thinking about it, I've really never played a high watt Marshall in real life or an actual Orange outside of just plugging into one at a guitar store for a brief 1 minute to try and impress the employee across the room who really could care less about being there. I think, however, eventually I was going to have to come to terms with the fact that the saying is true. Once you go Orange, you never go door hinge. I'm sorry. I can already kind of feel how cool it's going to be learning this amp because I don't know if you can see this, but they actually don't have treble, mids, and bass like they would on any normal amp. They just have symbols and pictures that represent them. That also goes for gain and volume, and I think it'll be cool to see just how I interact with this amp in the moment, knowing those like slight little differences. Plug a Les Paul Jr. with the volume on 10 into an Orange amp where the gain is cranked. What else are you going to expect? but it is one of those things where I'm not necessarily used to getting a lot of my crunchier tones without actually having to use like a distortion or overdrive pedal like a Tube Screamer or my DS1. I know that just in general, when I use the Princeton, when I use the AC-15, it can get a lot crunchier than I think it can if you just crank the volume, even though I see those as clean amps. With this amp, you don't even need to crank the volume or the gain that much, depending on what guitar you're using, to get like that orange tone, that classic rock thing. I really need to try the clean tones though. Really interesting with some of the clean settings, because I feel like what I'm hearing, and I didn't even have to take the volume down as much as I thought I would, I'm hearing a lot of pop or indie rock. If you would put like a drum beat behind that, or if you would really like emphasize those open voicings, and I like it because it's not necessarily a clean Fender clean. Obviously, knowing that I'm using an orange amp, you get a little bit of that drive in there, you get a little bit of that gain. And here's the deal, I mean, you're getting a one channel amp that's doing the crunchy thing, but the sound is also a lot warmer than I think I was expecting or I was used to. And maybe it's because of the cabinet that I was using or just because of my EQ settings. I don't even have the mids cranked that high, but when I was starting to solo, even with the tone on 8 or 9, I can just feel that warmth. All right, so here's the deal, and here's what I generally need to say. Obviously, different amps have different reputations for a variety of reasons, right? Like, for example, if I were to think of the John Mayer sound, I automatically go to, in my mind, a Fender amp or a Dumble amp. And the orange amp is no exception. As soon as I plugged into this, I was expecting the crunch thing. I was expecting the classic rock thing. But I genuinely don't think I could have prepared myself for how much I really liked the clean sound. And it took some tweaking because this is a one channel amp. This is an amp that is meant to give you that classic orange tone. But I think the problem is when we put amps in a box, or when we say that the Fender can't get the heavy thing if you put in a couple pedals, or that the orange can't get the clean thing when you really play with the volume knob and when you really play with the gain on your amp. I think it's also really cool to experience the difference between using the orange AD30 that I was using just with my amp sim and my DAW to actually being able to feel the air move on the real thing on the amp, to be able to touch the knobs and see how they actually work in real time. Now, here's the deal. I also have to be honest about the fact that the pros and cons, no amp is perfect. And with this thing, which sounds amazing, like I can't wait to play my Strat, my Tele, everything through it, you really do have to consider that the emulation, the amp sim is easy. This is a heavy tube amp. This is a heavy amp head. When you're bringing stuff to gigs, this is something that you need to be ready to carry. You might be getting those muscles, but I really do think mobility and ease are probably the biggest factor that divide people on whether or not you would be the type of person to stick to the classic tube amp thing, or be the type of person who's like, hey, I'm good with my amp sim. It gets me like 70 or 80% of the way there. Because I do think they did a good job emulating this amp, but genuinely you do have to consider the fact that there's nothing like hearing the air move in the room and like feeling that amp, especially when you're using a guitar like a Les Paul Jr., something that goes so well with this type of amp. You don't even have to use any pedals. I was just very much enjoying myself, doing some random noodling and pretending that I was in a stadium 5 times bigger than any 500-seat venue that I've ever played. All that being said, though, it really doesn't matter what I think. I can have all the opinions I want on orange amps and about crunchy amps. What matters is what you think, and I want to know what you think. Do you play orange amps? Have you tried them? What did you think of the sound? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Again, it was so much fun to check out just a new kind of amp that I don't usually use on a regular basis, to see the crunch thing, to see just how classic of an orange sound I can get. Orange, you're making some phenomenal amps and I really love using them. If you want to know anything more about this amp head, I got it from the homies at Sweetwater. The links are in the description. It's one of the best ways to support the channel if that's something you want to do, or if you're just curious about any of the gear that I use in this video, make sure to check out those links. Like and subscribe if you had a good time, and most importantly, most important of all, have a fantastic day.